Well, I thought you might like to know how I make a sugar bucket. So I made this video showing you what's going in this bucket and telling you how much sugar you need to store, why you need to store it, all the different types of sugar, and how to store the different types of sugar. So come along. Well, you might store sugar just in a bucket like this. And I do have a bucket of sugar stored, just sugar poured in the bucket. But I have had problems with it clumping up and hardening. And so I have come to the conclusion that it's better to store smaller packages so I can open a gamma lid, grab what I need, and then close the lid. So let me show you how I store my different sugar products. You know, sugar gets a bad rap, and it is deserved for our health. You know, we eat too much sugar. But I don't know if I'd want to live in a world without sugar. I do like the occasional chocolate or dessert. And in fact, I have always thought that chocolate was a much better barter item than silver. I know if it was end days, I'd pick the chocolate over the silver. And my husband, he would not be happy if he could not have sugar in his morning coffee. According to the LDS calculator, you should store 60 pounds of sugar for each person if you want a year food storage amount. Wow, 60 pounds sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But I want to mention, it's not just granulated sugar. It can be honey, it could be carob syrup, it could be maple syrup, good old molasses, confectioner sugar, or raw sugar, or maybe even brown sugar. So you've got a lot of choices. But there's different ways that you store the different sugars. Now, some people will say, oh, you shouldn't store sugar at all. You know, white granulated sugar, it's just not good for you. You need to store only honey. And it is true, honey has a lot of other nutrients, you know, minerals in it, and it has antibacterial properties that can be used for wound care. It is pretty amazing stuff. And you can store it like raw honey, honey in the comb, or this pasteurized honey. Now, I like the taste of honey. I think it's great, but I don't use it for a lot of my cooking. You'd have to change a lot of recipes. They're made for your regular, old, right, white granulated sugar. Not saying you couldn't convert them for honey, but I really think you don't have to store one as opposed to the other. Why not store both? Because that's what I do. And you know, I talked about the wound care properties for honey, and of course it's even better if you have a different type of honey, Melanuca honey. That's even better for wound care. And something else I should mention, it's always good to get honey that is actually produced in the area you live. It helps with allergies. But I wanted to tell you just a short story about just regular old sugar. We were always told that my grandfather, who was born in the 1880s and then homesteaded in North Dakota. My mom was actually born in 1907 in North Dakota. He was out hunting, whatever, and he was on the horse-driven carriage, and he had his gun propped next to him, and his thumb was over it. Something happened, it went off, it got him in various parts. In fact, I think it was like 30 years later, a piece of buckshot actually came out of his face. But anyway, it also got him in the area that he was bleeding profusely, and they lived over a day round trip from a doctor. And so my grandmother used sugar underneath on his mattress and by the wounds, and it actually coagulated the blood and stopped him, according to the doctor of that time, from bleeding to death. You know, a lot of people use sugar for wound care. Is that true? I don't know if people still do, if it really does help. but my grandmother swore by it. Now there's different types of sugar, right? You got your white granulated sugar, but you also got your raw sugar. And it isn't necessarily one is that much better for you than the other. They're really about the same. It's just the way they're processed. But the raw sugar is great in your coffee, and it's bigger granules. So it's also good on top of baked goods and things like that. Whereas your granulated sugar dissolves a lot faster. Now I think we've all went into sugar and found it like in clumps, caked clumps, not in the nice separated granules. And why does that happen? Well, the enemy for sugar, white sugar, is moisture. You have to keep it away from moisture. And if you live like we do in a high humidity area, that can be very difficult. Now, if you buy sugar in a paper bag, I do not recommend storing it for long term in that bag. You also have to be careful where you store your sugar because it can absorb odors around it. Many people pour the sugar into canning jars and seal it and store it that way. But I have to say, when you're sealing it, do not use an oxygen absorber. I'm going to repeat that. Do not use an oxygen absorber, because that will make your sugar a complete hard brick that you might need a chisel to get sugar off. So the enemy of sugar is not oxygen, it is moisture. Now I like storing it in these. It's already sealed. It seems to keep a long time in my buckets. But use whatever canning jars or even Ziploc bags, whatever you have available. Just do not use that oxygen absorber. Now, what do you do if you've done everything right, but your sugar is hardening into clumps? Well, here's what Domino says. Granulated sugar will harden when exposed to any type of moisture. Here's an easy way to make hardened granulated sugar soft again. Preheat your oven to the lowest temperature, 150 to 200 degrees. Remove sugar from the package and put in an oven-proof container that will hold the sugar. Place in the warm oven for approximately 15 minutes. Tap the sugar with a spoon. If it starts to fall apart, turn oven off and leave sugar in the oven for an hour or two to completely dry out. Always store granulated sugar in an airtight container. Well, there you have it. That's what you need to do. So what about one of the other types of sugar we use a lot in cooking? And that is brown sugar. And it comes in light and dark varieties. And brown sugar is simply that granulated sugar with molasses added. Yes, molasses here. In fact, here's an easy recipe if you wanted to make your own brown sugar. You wouldn't have to store this. You just have to store your molasses and your granulated white sugar. So to make brown sugar is really easy. You have 1 pound of white granulated sugar and you add 1 tablespoon of molasses. If you want light brown sugar, if you want dark brown sugar, you add 2 tablespoons of molasses. You need to combine the sugar and molasses in a mixing bowl using an electric mixer on medium speed. You really need to mix it until the molasses is completely incorporated. And then, of course, store in an airtight container. Now you'll see this say best used in 2 years very often on the label. I've had it keep for a long, long time. But unlike white granulated sugar, brown sugar's enemy is not moisture. In fact, it needs moisture. Instead, its enemy is air. So let me show you how I store this. The way I store my brown sugar is I cut off one corner, little corner, and then I vacuum pack it. You see, it's very, very hard feeling. But this keeps my brown sugar fresh for years. I really recommend this. I did not come up with this myself. I remember seeing it, I think it was on Cat's Cradle's channel. But a great way to keep brown sugar. So for everyday use brown sugar, I use my little terracotta teddy bear, soak that in water, and put it in my brown sugar, and that keeps it nice and moist. So what happens if your brown sugar hardens in your long-term storage? Well, then you can do a variety of things. You can put a moist paper towel in with a Ziploc bag with the sugar in it and wait a day, and that might restore the moisture. There's a variety of different techniques, from using apple slices and fresh bread slices. But really, for everyday storage, your little terracotta teddy bear works just great. So, what I've mentioned, your granulated sugar, your raw sugar, it keeps indefinitely if stored right. Another one that can is confectioner's sugar or powdered sugar. And this is used a lot in dessert baking. And you can keep it in the original bag for a long, long time. Really, it is just finely ground granulated white sugar with some cornstarch added. Which, if you had the right food processor or blender, have to be heavy duty, you could make your own by adding cornstarch to granulated sugar. But it sure is a lot easier just to buy it. I should mention again, you want to keep it dry and sealed tight, but no oxygen absorber. So molasses, remember I said you could use it to make brown sugar? Well, it generally has about a 2-year best use date, I should say, from when you purchase it. But it can last a lot longer, especially if it's closed, and even opened. I mean, I don't use molasses very often in a recipe. And I sometimes don't know how long that thing of molasses has been on my shelf, but it seems to be just fine. Now, the one thing you don't want to do with molasses is put it in your refrigerator, because it will harden. Maple syrup, how long does it last? Well, people have said it's been over 50 years before if kept in the original glass container and unopened. I can tell you I have had syrup, would you call it go bad? I've poured stuff out and some mold came out on top of it. Now, my understanding is you can just remove that mold and still use it, but I didn't do that because it did not look too appetizing. But unopened like this in a glass container, it can keep a long, long time. You have to be a little careful if it is in a metal container, because that could cause the metal to rust. But the best way to store it, just keep it in the original container. And again, buy maple syrup from sources more local. It's better for your local economy, and it might even be better for your health. There goes that tail again. Yes, Xander had to make his entrance. Okay, corn syrup. How long does it last? Again, pretty indefinite. Basically what happens, eventually it will lose some of its taste and it might discolor a bit, but corn syrup in its original container will last a long, long time. So storing liquid honey is best in a dark area with a temperature between 70 and 80 degrees. So it's best on your pantry shelves generally. And again, indefinite shelf life, but it can turn granular. And if you want to get it back to its original state, you put it in hot water, not boiling water, and stir it, and eventually you'll have honey again. Those granules will melt. But yes, Xander, it stores very, very well for a long, long period of time. I think they've even found it in pharaoh's tombs. So honey is a great thing to have in your sugar bucket. Now, something else that people use, stevia. I really don't know much about it. I don't use it, so I don't know. The manufacturer says a 3 to 4 years life. The best thing with that, I think, is to grow your own and dry it, and then you have as much as you need. Now, something else I'm storing in the bucket, even though it's not really sugar, is some semi-sweet morsels, some milk chocolate, and peanut butter ones. And what I do is the same as for the brown sugar. I cut off one corner, put it in a bag, and then vacuum pack it. And these keep for a long, long time. You can also pour them into a canning jar and vacuum seal that. So in my 6-gallon sugar bucket, I have 12 pounds of sugar in 3 containers, 4 pounds of brown sugar, 4 separate packets, 4 pounds of powdered sugar, 2 pounds raw sugar, 1 jar honey, 1 jar maple syrup, 1 jar molasses, 1 jar Karo syrup, 1 bag of semi-sweet chocolate chips, 1 bag of milk chocolate chips, and 1 bag of peanut butter chips. Well, I hope I've inspired you to put some sweetness in your food storage. As always, please subscribe and share the knowledge.